My name is Elias, a 32-year-old financial analyst from Chicago, and I have always been the responsible brother. Meanwhile, my sister Melissa was always the golden child, despite her manipulative ways. When she begged me to co-sign her $60,000 dream wedding loan, I reluctantly agreed, but with a secret clause she never bothered to read. 6 months later, she and her new husband fled the country laughing, thinking they had left me drowning in debt. They had no idea about the fine print I added until the collection agency called my parents instead. Before I dive into this wild story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that subscribe button and give this video a like if you have ever had a family member take advantage of your kindness. Trust me, you will want to hear how I turned the tables on my scheming sister. Growing up in suburban Boston, our middle-class family seemed normal from the outside. My parents, Richard and Karen, worked hard to provide for us. Dad was an insurance salesman, while Mom taught at the local elementary school. Being 4 years older than Melissa, I was always expected to be the responsible one, to set a good example, to look out for my little sister. But that dynamic quickly morphed into something unhealthy that would follow us into adulthood. From the beginning, Melissa seemed to understand how to work the system. When she was just 5 years old, she broke Mom's favorite crystal vase while throwing a tantrum. When our parents came running to see what happened, she was already pointing at me with tears streaming down her face. "Elias pushed me, and I fell into it," she claimed. Despite my protests, my parents believed her. That was the first time I took the blame for something Melissa did, but it certainly would not be the last. As we grew older, the pattern continued. In middle school, money started disappearing from our parents' wallets. $20 here, $50 there. I would overhear hushed arguments between Mom and Dad about being more careful with cash, about keeping better track of expenses. Then one day, Dad sat me down for a man-to-man talk about respect and honesty. I realized with horror that they suspected me of stealing. Meanwhile, Melissa had a growing collection of new makeup and clothes that somehow no one questioned. "You need to be honest with us, Elias," Dad said sternly. "Where's the money going?" No matter how much I denied it, they were convinced I was lying. It was only years later that I caught Melissa in the act, carefully replacing Dad's wallet after lightening it by $40. When I confronted her, she simply shrugged. "They would never believe you anyway," she said with a smirk. And she was right. The ultimate example of the double standard came when it was time for college. I had worked my tail off for a partial scholarship to Boston University, maintained a job throughout school, and still graduated with $20,000 in student loans. Melissa, on the other hand, barely scraped by in high school, but convinced our parents she needed the college experience at an expensive private university in California. They drained their savings and took out second mortgage to pay for it. She dropped out after 3 semesters. Despite everything, I built a solid life for myself. After getting my accounting degree, I worked for a big firm for 5 years while earning my MBA at night. Eventually, I landed a great position as a financial analyst with a renewable energy company in Chicago. I had my own apartment, a healthy retirement account, and minimal debt. I was proud of what I had accomplished on my own. Melissa, meanwhile, continued her pattern of using people. She bounced from job to job, boyfriend to boyfriend, always with some drama that required financial assistance. And despite being burned before, I still helped her. When she totaled her uninsured car, I loaned her $5,000 for a replacement. Never saw a penny back. When she got evicted from her apartment, I paid her security deposit and first month's rent at a new place. She moved out 3 months later without telling me. Our parents remained oblivious to her manipulation. Mom would call me regularly with updates about Melissa's latest adventure or opportunity, completely blind to the fact that these were just covers for her failures and schemes. "Your sister is just finding herself," Mom would say whenever I expressed concern. "Not everyone has their life figured out as early as you did, Elias." It was during one of these updates that I first heard about Jason. Melissa had met him at some upscale club in San Diego, where she had moved after her latest job fell through. According to Mom, He was quite the catch, some kind of entrepreneur with international business connections. The photos Melissa posted online showed a tall, tan man with perfectly capped teeth and designer clothes. Something about him seemed off to me immediately. The watch he wore in several pictures was a knockoff of an expensive brand I recognized from my wealthier clients. The luxury car he posed beside had rental stickers partially visible in the window. But whenever I tried to ask Melissa reasonable questions about his business or background, she would accuse me of being jealous. "Not everyone has to work a boring office job like you, Elias," she snapped during one phone call. "Jason makes deals, big ones, with important people. Yet he never seemed to have any specific details about these deals or important people. Red flag after red flag went up, but no one in my family wanted to see them. They were too dazzled by the expensive restaurants, the lavish gifts, and the exotic weekend trips that Jason supposedly paid for. Looking back, I should have pushed harder, asked more questions. But after years of being painted as the negative, suspicious brother, I had grown tired of the role. Little did I know that my financial stability and responsible nature were about to make me the perfect target for their biggest scam yet. The engagement announcement came after only 3 months of dating. Melissa called our parents first, then me, screaming with excitement about the enormous diamond ring that Jason had surprised her with. When she sent photos, I immediately noticed something off about the stone. Having recently helped a colleague shop for an engagement ring, I recognized the slightly too perfect clarity and the way it caught light in the photos. It looked suspiciously like a high-end cubic zirconia or moissanite replica. But saying anything would only make me the villain again, so I kept my concerns to myself and offered congratulations. 2 weeks later, Melissa called me directly, which was unusual. She typically only reached out when she needed something. This time was no different. "I need to tell you about our wedding plans," she gushed. "We have found the absolute perfect venue. It is this historic mansion on the coast, with gardens overlooking the ocean. You can see all the way to Catalina Island on a clear day." As she continued describing the venue, the exclusive caterer, the designer dress she had her eye on, and the 10-piece band they wanted to hire, I did some quick mental math. The price tag for what she was describing would easily exceed $100,000. "That sounds amazing, Melissa," I said carefully. "But that must be pretty expensive. How are you planning to pay for all of this?" There was a brief pause before she laughed a little too brightly. "Well, that is actually why I am calling you. Jason's assets are temporarily tied up in this huge international deal. Something about import regulations freezing some accounts. It is super complicated." "Uh-huh," I said, unconvinced. "What about Mom and Dad? Are they contributing?" "You know they do not have that kind of money, Elias," she said, suddenly serious. "Besides, we want to do this ourselves." "By ourselves, you mean? We just need a loan," she said quickly. "Just to cover things until Jason's deal comes through. 60,000 would cover the basics, and then we can add the extras once his accounts are unfrozen." I nearly choked. $60,000? Melissa, that is insane for a one-day event. Why not do something smaller? The average wedding costs around 30,000, and even that is excessive for most people. Her tone changed instantly. "Of course you would say that. You have always been so cheap." "This is my special day, Elias. The most important day of my life. I am not asking you to pay for it. We just need a co-signer for the loan since Jason's credit is temporarily affected by this business situation. Co-signing is the same as taking out the loan myself if you default," I explained, trying to keep my cool. "It puts my credit and financial security at risk. So you are trying to ruin my wedding because you are jealous that I found someone amazing while you are still single at 32? That is really pathetic, Elias." The conversation devolved from there, with Melissa eventually hanging up on me after I suggested they consider a more reasonable budget. I thought that would be the end of it, but I underestimated my sister's persistence. The guilt trip campaign began the next day. First came a call from Mom. "Your sister is absolutely heartbroken," she began without even saying hello. She called me crying so hard I could barely understand her. "Mom, She wants me to co-sign a $60,000 loan for an extravagant wedding when she has no job, and her fiancé's financial situation is sketchy at best. Why do you always have to be so negative about your sister? Mom sighed. Jason comes from a very good family. These business setbacks are just temporary. Have you met his family? I asked. Well, no, Mom admitted. They live overseas most of the time. Switzerland, I think. Of course they did. Dad called next, taking a different approach. Son, sometimes being the responsible one, means stepping up for family. Your sister has made mistakes, but she really loves this guy. Do you want her to resent you forever because you ruined her special day? The calls continued for days. Aunts, uncles, even our grandmother weighed in, all having heard a carefully crafted version of the story that cast me as the villain. The pressure was intense. A week after the initial call, Melissa showed up at my apartment in Chicago unannounced. She had a thick binder full of wedding plans, venue brochures, catering menus, and dress designs. She walked me through each element, describing her perfect day in painstaking detail. The way she talked about it, you would think this wedding would solve all the world's problems. And here is the payment schedule, she said, flipping to a spreadsheet. The venue needs $30,000 as a deposit. The rest is for the dress, catering deposits, photographer, flowers, band, and honeymoon. Honeymoon? That is included in this loan too? Just a small one, she said dismissively. 2 weeks in Bali. Jason says we deserve it after all the stress of planning. As she continued talking, the truth became unavoidably clear. They did not expect me to co-sign a loan. They expected me to pay for everything. There was no real repayment plan, just vague assurances about Jason's future business success. I cannot do this, Melissa, I said firmly, when she finally paused for breath. It is not reasonable or responsible. Her face crumpled instantly, tears appearing on command. I knew you would say that. You have never supported me, never believed in me. Everyone else is so happy for us, but my own brother wants to see me fail. She stormed out dramatically, slamming the door hard enough that my neighbor poked her head out to check what was happening. The family cold shoulder treatment began immediately. My calls to Mom and Dad went straight to voicemail. Text messages were answered with one-word responses, if at all. It was emotional manipulation 101, and despite recognizing it for what it was, it still hurt. 3 weeks of strained family relations passed before Melissa made her next move. It was nearly midnight when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find my sister standing there, eyes red and puffy from crying, mascara streaked down her cheeks. She looked genuinely distraught. "Can I come in?" she asked in a small voice. Against my better judgment, I stepped aside. Melissa immediately launched into a story about how everything was falling apart. The venue was threatening to give away their date. The dress designer needed a deposit immediately. Jason was working tirelessly to resolve his financial issues, but kept hitting bureaucratic roadblocks. "You are the only one who can help us," she said, clutching my hand desperately. I would not ask if there was any other way. "What about Jason's family? His parents?" I asked. "Surely they could help." Melissa shook her head sadly. "His father is very ill. They are dealing with huge medical bills. Jason does not want to burden them further." Convenient. Another unverifiable claim. "Look," she continued, pulling out a folder. "We have created a detailed repayment plan. Once Jason's deal closes next month, we will start paying you back immediately, with interest." The folder contained a surprisingly professional-looking payment schedule, showing monthly installments plus 5% interest. According to the document, the loan would be fully repaid within 18 months. It even had spaces for signatures and had been notarized. "We are completely serious about this," Melissa insisted. Jason even suggested adding a clause that if we miss more than 2 payments, you could place a lien against our future property. "We are planning to buy a house next year." I had to admit, it looked more legitimate than I had expected. Still, something felt off. "I need to think about it," I told her. "The venue needs an answer by tomorrow," she countered. "Otherwise, we lose our date and our dream location." Of course, there was an artificial deadline, There always was with Melissa. The next day, both my parents called. Mom was emotional. "I just do not understand why you cannot help your sister this one time," she said, voice cracking. "After everything we did for you growing up." Dad took a different tack. "Son, your mother and I would help if we could, but we just do not have that kind of money. Melissa says you have a substantial emergency fund. This is an emergency for her." How did Melissa know about my emergency fund? I had never discussed the specifics of my finances with her. The invasion of privacy bothered me almost as much as the request itself. Feeling cornered, I reached out to my friend Sarah, a financial attorney I had met during an industry conference. I explained the situation and asked for her professional opinion. "This has red flags all over it," she said bluntly after hearing the details. "The rushed timeline, the vague business deals, the excessive amount. I would strongly advise against co-signing anything." "I know it is a bad idea," I admitted. "But the family pressure is intense. If you are even considering it despite all the warning signs, at least add some serious protection clauses," Sarah advised. "I can help you draft language that gives you recourse if they default. And for God's sake, make sure the money goes directly to the vendors, not to them." Sarah's advice gave me an idea. If I was going to be pressured into this, I would do it on my terms, with every possible protection in place. The next day, I called Melissa. "I will meet with you and Jason at my bank tomorrow to discuss the loan." "No promises, but I am willing to listen." She squealed with delight, thanking me profusely. For the first time in weeks, my parents were warm during our evening call. Amazing how quickly attitudes changed when they thought I was giving in. Mr. Reynolds, the loan officer at my bank, was a no-nonsense man in his 50s who had helped me with my mortgage pre-approval the previous year. I arrived early to explain the situation privately. "So you are considering co-signing a significant loan for your sister's wedding," he summarized. "Against your better judgment. Family pressure," I explained weakly. He nodded knowingly. "I see this more often than you might think. But there are ways to protect yourself if you are determined to proceed." When Melissa and Jason arrived, I was struck again by how perfect they looked together. Both attractive, well-dressed, beaming with confidence. Jason immediately turned on the charm, shaking Mr. Reynolds' hand firmly and engaging in smooth small talk about the banking industry. He certainly knew how to make an impression. As we discussed the loan terms, I suggested several conditions. The money would be paid directly to vendors, not to Melissa and Jason. They would need to provide proof of income and financial stability. And most importantly, I wanted a special clause added regarding collateral and fraud protection. If the loan goes into default, I explained, I want secondary guarantors assigned to share responsibility. "Secondary guarantors?" Melissa asked, frowning slightly. "Yes, Mom and Dad would be listed as backup co-signers. If you default, and I can prove reasonable suspicion of fraud, the obligation transfers partially to them." Jason shifted uncomfortably. "Is that really necessary? It seems overly complicated." "It is just protection for everyone involved," I said smoothly. "If you are planning to repay as promised, it will never come into play." Melissa seemed hesitant, but Jason quickly recovered. "Of course, we will repay as promised. If this makes Elias more comfortable, I have no objection." Mr. Reynolds gave me a subtle nod of approval as he made notes about the additional terms. I could tell he understood exactly what I was doing. When the final paperwork was prepared, it included all my conditions, plus some additional protections that Mr. Reynolds had suggested. The document was lengthy, with the crucial clauses buried in the middle. I watched carefully as Melissa and Jason signed. As I suspected, neither bothered to read beyond the first page, skimming quickly and signing with flourishes where indicated. When I finally added my own signature, I felt a mixture of dread and strange satisfaction. I was taking a massive risk, but not entirely without protection. "Congratulations," Mr. Reynolds said, as he processed the final paperwork. "The funds will be distributed to the approved vendors within 3 business days." Melissa hugged me tightly, tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Elias. This means everything to me." Jason clapped me on the shoulder. "You will not regret this, brother. We will make sure of it." As they left the bank, arm in arm and already discussing wedding details, I could not shake the feeling that I had just made a terrible mistake. But if I was right about them, at least I had built in a safety net they knew nothing about. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of wedding preparations. Suddenly, I was the beloved brother again, included in family calls and text chains. Mom repeatedly told me how proud she was that I had stepped up for my sister. Dad invited me fishing for the first time in years. The emotional manipulation had worked exactly as intended. The wedding venue was even more extravagant than Melissa had described. A historic mansion perched on a coastal cliff, with manicured gardens stretching down toward the ocean. Walking through the ornate entrance hall with its crystal chandeliers and marble floors, I mentally calculated how many months of my salary were being spent on this single day. The ceremony itself was a spectacle clearly designed for social media. Melissa's dress, a custom creation with a 15-foot train, must have cost at least $20,000 alone. There were ice sculptures at every table, a champagne fountain in the center of the reception hall, and what appeared to be a minor celebrity DJ that I vaguely recognized from television. During the cocktail hour, I found myself near Jason and one of his groomsmen, a slick-looking man introduced as his business partner, Vince. They were speaking in hushed tones, not realizing I was within earshot. "Everything going according to the plan?" Vince asked, sipping champagne. Jason nodded slightly. "Perfect timing. 2 months max, and we are in the clear." "The brothers suspect anything?" "Nah. Financial types are the easiest. They think they are too smart to get conned." They moved away before I could hear more, but their words sent a chill through me. I tried to convince myself I was being paranoid, that they could have been discussing a legitimate business deal. But combined with everything else, my suspicions deepened. Later, during the reception, Melissa pulled me aside, slightly tipsy from champagne. "I cannot thank you enough for making this happen," she slurred, gesturing grandly at the opulent surroundings. "Just remember our agreement," I said. "First payment is due next month," she waved dismissively. "Do not worry so much. Jason says we will not need to worry about money soon. Big things are happening." "What kind of big things?" I pressed. Her expression changed briefly, something calculating flashing behind her eyes before the bubbly bride mask returned. "Just business stuff. Boring business stuff that would make your accountant brain explode with excitement." In the weeks following the wedding, Melissa and Jason became increasingly difficult to reach. They missed our parents' anniversary dinner, claiming they were swamped with post-wedding thank you cards. My calls went to voicemail. Texts were answered hours or sometimes days later with vague excuses. The first loan payment due date came and went. No payment, no communication. When I finally got Melissa on the phone, she laughed it off. "We just got back from our honeymoon yesterday. Give us a break. We will catch up next month, promise." Against my better judgment, I decided to drop by their apartment unannounced. What I found sent alarm bells ringing. Through their partially open blinds, I could see stacks of boxes. Their living room, which had been fully furnished the last time I visited, was now half empty. When they answered the door, both looked surprised and slightly annoyed. "Elias, you should have called first," Melissa said, blocking the entrance. I tried, multiple times. "What is going on with all the boxes?" "Just reorganizing," Jason said smoothly. "Melissa's organizational kick. You know how new wives are." I did not know how new wives were, but I was pretty sure they did not typically pack their apartments into moving boxes while ignoring loan payments. "The first payment was due last week," I said directly. "The bank contacted me as the co-signer." Jason's friendly demeanor shifted instantly. "We have been busy, and honestly, 1 week late is not the end of the world. I find it pretty insulting that you would show up unannounced to harass us about it." "It is not harassment to expect you to honor an agreement that puts my financial future at risk," I countered. The conversation quickly deteriorated. Melissa accused me of never trusting her. Jason suggested I was jealous of their happiness. Eventually, they asked me to leave, promising the payment would be made very soon. That night, I could not sleep. Everything about the situation felt wrong. I decided to do something I should have done months earlier: investigate Jason thoroughly. Using some connections from work, and with Sarah's guidance, I began digging into his background. What I found confirmed my worst fears. Jason Thompson was not even his real name. His actual identity was Jeremy Turner, a man with a history of fraud cases in 3 different states. He had pulled similar schemes before: charm a financially vulnerable woman, create an elaborate story about business success, leverage her family connections for money, then disappear. I compiled all the information into a secure file, including court records and news articles about his previous scams. Sarah helped me prepare documentation that would establish a pattern of fraud if needed. We also set up financial safeguards, placing fraud alerts on my credit and preparing paperwork to dispute the loan if necessary. "You should go to the police now," Sarah advised. "Without proof they are actually planning to skip out, they would just deny everything," I reasoned. "Melissa would claim I was trying to ruin her marriage out of spite. I need to catch them in the act." Sarah reluctantly agreed, but insisted we have everything prepared for immediate legal action when needed. Deep down, I was still hoping to be wrong. That despite all evidence, my sister was not actively participating in a scheme to destroy my financial future. I was wrong to hope. Exactly 6 weeks after the wedding, I received an automated notification from the bank. The loan was now 30 days past due, and as co-signer, my credit was at risk. I immediately tried calling both Melissa and Jason. All calls went straight to voicemail. Text messages showed as delivered but unread. Emails bounced back. Increasingly desperate, I drove to their apartment after work. The building manager was outside, supervising some maintenance. "I am looking for my sister and her husband," I explained. "Apartment 307. He looked confused. 307? Those tenants moved out 2 days ago. Middle of the night from what I could tell. My stomach dropped. Did they leave a forwarding address? Nope. Dropped their keys in the night deposit box with a note saying they would not need their security deposit returned. He studied my face. Family problems, huh? That is rough. In a daze, I asked if I could see the apartment. He hesitated but eventually agreed to let me look since I could prove I was related to the former tenant. The apartment was completely empty, except for some trash and discarded items they had deemed not worth taking. In the kitchen trash, I found torn-up wedding photos. In the bedroom closet, a single bridesmaid dress left hanging. The bathroom cabinet contained empty prescription bottles with Melissa's name. As I was leaving, the building manager stopped me. Almost forgot. They did leave something in the mailbox. Said it was for family. He handed me a small padded envelope with, "For Elias," written on it in Melissa's handwriting. Inside was a USB drive. No note. No explanation. I drove home in a fog of disbelief and mounting dread. When I plugged the USB into my computer, it contained a single video file. With shaking hands, I clicked play. Melissa and Jason appeared on screen, sitting on what looked like airplane seats. First class, based on the spacious background. "Hey, big brother," Melissa waved cheerfully. "By the time you see this, we will be long gone. Somewhere with beautiful beaches, amazing food, and conveniently, no extradition treaty with the United States." Jason leaned into frame, grinning. "We just wanted to thank you for the amazing wedding. Truly a day to remember. And for the $60,000, Melissa added with a laugh. "Though I guess technically it is your $60,000 now. Oops." They high-fived each other, laughing. "Did you really think I would suddenly become responsible?" Melissa continued. "That I would settle down and make monthly payments like a boring adult? Come on, Elias. You are supposed to be the smart one." Jason put his arm around her. "Your sister has told me so many stories about how you always bailed her out, how you were always so responsible while she got away with everything. We figured, why break tradition?" "The best part," Melissa said, leaning toward the camera conspiratorially, "is that family always forgives. So, in a few years, when we have had our fun, I can call Mom and Dad crying about how everything went wrong, and they will welcome me back with open arms. They always do. And you will too," Jason added. "Because that is what family does, right? At least, that is what you all keep saying whenever you want someone to do something stupid against their better judgment." They both laughed again, and Melissa blew a kiss to the camera. Bye, Elias. Enjoy those monthly payments. Think of us on a beach somewhere while you are writing those checks." The video ended, and I sat in stunned silence, my heart pounding in my ears. Then I did something I had not done since childhood. I broke down and cried. Deep, gut-wrenching sobs of betrayal, rage, and fear. $60,000. My emergency fund would be decimated. My perfect credit score ruined. Years of careful financial planning destroyed in one moment of familial weakness. As I sat surrounded by the shattered pieces of my financial security, my phone rang. An unknown number. I answered mechanically. "Mr. Marshall? This is Amanda Kirk from Allied Collection Services. I am calling about a delinquent loan from First National Bank in the amount of $63,422.16. Our records indicate you are the co-signer on this loan, which is now 45 days past due." Reality came crashing down. This was happening. It was real. "Yes," I managed to say. "I am aware of the situation. The primary borrowers have left the country." "I see," Amanda said, her tone suggesting she had heard similar stories before. "In that case, as the co-signer, the responsibility for repayment falls to you. We will need to arrange a payment plan immediately to prevent further credit damage." As she continued explaining my limited options, a sudden memory surfaced. The special clause I had added to the loan agreement. The one about secondary guarantors in case of suspected fraud. "Actually," I interrupted, "there is something you should know about this loan. There is a special provision regarding fraud and secondary guarantors. I need to speak with someone who has access to the complete loan agreement." Amanda posed. "Let me transfer you to our legal department." As I waited on hold, I frantically searched for Sarah's number. If there was ever a time I needed a financial attorney, it was now. "The clause is valid," Sarah confirmed, after reviewing the loan documentation I had forwarded to her. "You specifically added language that in case of provable fraud, your parents become secondary guarantors responsible for 40% of the remaining balance." "But they had no idea," I said, feeling sick. "They did not sign anything." "Actually, they did," Sarah pointed out. "Remember that birthday card they sent you right before the wedding? The one where they wrote that they were so proud of you for helping your sister and that they fully support this decision? You included that as an attachment to the loan modification, and the bank accepted it as written consent." I vaguely remembered Mr. Reynolds suggesting I include any written communications from my parents about the loan. At the time, it had seemed like just an extra precaution. "So what happens now?" "Now we activate the fraud protection provisions," Sarah explained. "We submit the video, the evidence of Jason's true identity and previous scams, and documentation of their deliberate plan to default. The bank will investigate, and when fraud is confirmed, the secondary guarantor provision kicks in. Your parents will be contacted about their portion of the responsibility." My stomach churned at the thought. "They are going to hate me." "They pushed you into this," Sarah reminded me gently. "And they have been enabling Melissa's behavior for years. Maybe it is time for some consequences all around." The next morning, I met with bank officials and representatives from the collection agency. I presented the video, the evidence about Jason's true identity, and documentation of their hasty departure from the country. The bank's fraud department took everything very seriously. "This is a clear case of premeditated loan fraud," the bank's legal representative concluded. "We will be filing criminal charges against both parties. In the meantime, per the terms of your modified agreement, we will be contacting the secondary guarantors about their portion of the obligation." I left feeling hollow. The machinery of justice was in motion, but it brought me no joy. That evening, my phone exploded with notifications. My parents had been contacted by the collection agency. "What have you done?" Mom screamed when I answered her call. "We just got a call saying we owe $25,000 for Melissa's wedding loan. How could you do this to us?" "I did not do this to you," I replied, my voice surprisingly steady. "Melissa and Jason did. And you and Dad helped them by pressuring me into co-signing despite all the warning signs." "That is ridiculous. We never signed anything." "The card you sent me, Mom. The one where you wrote that you fully supported my decision to help Melissa. The bank accepted that as written consent to be secondary guarantors. It was in the loan terms that no one bothered to read. There was a long silence. Then Dad came on the line. "We need to meet. Tomorrow. Our house." The next day, I drove back to my childhood home in Boston, the file of evidence heavy in my briefcase. My parents sat stone-faced at the kitchen table as I laid out everything. The video, Jason's true identity, the pattern of previous frauds, the text messages showing their pressure campaign. "She planned this," I said finally. "She found a con man who specialized in this exact scheme, and together they targeted me because they knew I had savings and good credit. And they knew you would pressure me into helping her." Mom was crying silently. Dad stared at the evidence, his face ashen. "If you had just listened to me," I continued, "if any of you had just taken my concerns seriously, instead of making me the villain for being cautious, none of this would have happened." "So now we lose our home?" Dad asked quietly. "We are retired, Elias. We cannot come up with $25,000. The guilt I had anticipated hit me hard, but I pushed through it. "The bank is willing to work out a payment plan, and when they find Melissa and Jason, there will be restitution ordered." "If they find them," Mom corrected bitterly. "They will," I assured her. "International financial crimes are taken very seriously. The FBI is already involved because they crossed state lines in commission of the fraud." My parents looked shocked. "The FBI?" I nodded. "This is not just family drama anymore. This is federal wire fraud, conspiracy, and possibly money laundering depending on how they moved the funds." The reality of the situation finally seemed to sink in. Their golden child was not just irresponsible or impulsive, she was a criminal who had deliberately set out to harm her own family. The next few weeks were a blur of legal meetings, paperwork, and tense family discussions. My parents had to take out a home equity loan to cover their portion of the debt, a bitter pill for them to swallow in retirement. I depleted most of my emergency fund to cover my share, though the fraud determination had at least protected my credit score from major damage. Then came the breakthrough we had been waiting for. Jason had made a critical mistake. He had used his real name to rent a villa in Bali, a country that did have an extradition treaty with the United States for certain crimes. Financial fraud was one of them. The authorities froze their accounts and restricted their movements. Suddenly cut off from their fraudulently obtained funds, panic set in. That is when Melissa called me, sobbing hysterically. "They are saying we cannot leave the villa. Our accounts are frozen. Please, Elias, you have to help us." "Like you helped me by stealing $60,000 and ruining my credit?" I asked calmly. "It was Jason's idea. I never wanted to hurt you. The video where you laughed about it suggests otherwise." She began crying harder. "He is blaming everything on me now. He says it was all my plan, that he was just going along with what I wanted. Please, I need to come home. I will make everything right, I promise." The old Elias would have weakened, would have found a way to help her escape the consequences of her actions. But that Elias died the day I watched my sister laugh about destroying my financial future. "The FBI is handling your case now," I said dispassionately. "I suggest you cooperate fully if you want any leniency." "Leniency?" she whispered. "What does that mean?" "It means prison time, Melissa. The only question is how much." I could hear her breathing accelerate into panic. "Prison? No, no, no. You cannot let that happen. I am your sister. You should have remembered that before you committed federal fraud against me." The legal process moved surprisingly quickly after they were detained. Jason, facing his third fraud conviction, turned on Melissa immediately, offering evidence against her in exchange for a plea deal. She, in turn, provided authorities with information about other scams he had run that they did not know about. While the wheels of justice turned, my family splintered. Some relatives sided with me, finally seeing Melissa for who she truly was. Others insisted I had overreacted, that blood is thicker than water, and I should have found a way to handle it privately. My parents were caught in the middle, devastated by Melissa's betrayal, but also resentful of the financial burden they now shared because of my protective clause. "You could have left us out of it," Dad said during one tense conversation. "If I had not included that clause, I would be solely responsible for the entire $60,000, I pointed out. You pushed me into this loan against my better judgment. It seems fair that you share some of the responsibility. It was harsh, but it was also true. After years of enabling Melissa at my expense, they were finally facing consequences alongside me. The court proceedings were mercifully brief. Jason, with his prior convictions, received 8 years in federal prison for fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering. Melissa, positioned by her attorney as an influenced accomplice rather than an equal partner, received 3 years with possibility of parole after 18 months. Watching my sister being led away in handcuffs should have felt like vindication. Instead, it just felt sad. What kind of person defrauds their own brother? What kind of family dynamic had we created where this seemed like an acceptable path? My parents attended every hearing, aging visibly with each court appearance. The realization that they had contributed to creating this situation through years of enabling behavior was a bitter pill for them to swallow. For the first time, they were forced to see the pattern that had been obvious to me for years. "We failed both of you," Mom said quietly after the sentencing. "We taught Melissa that she could get away with anything, and we taught you that your concerns did not matter." It was the closest thing to an apology I had ever received from her. The road to rebuilding trust was long and painful. We tried family therapy, which helped establish healthier communication patterns. I learned to express my feelings instead of just my logical concerns. My parents learned to recognize manipulation tactics they had previously been blind to. The loan was eventually nullified due to the fraud determination, though recovering the actual money proved impossible. Melissa and Jason had spent most of it on the wedding and their brief luxury escape. My emergency fund was slowly rebuilt. My parents' home equity loan would take years to pay off, a constant reminder of the cost of their blind spot. When Melissa was released on parole after 18 months, she was a different person. Prison has a way of stripping away pretenses. She moved into a halfway house and got a job as a waitress, the first honest work she had done in years. Our relationship was fundamentally altered. I no longer trusted her, but I was willing to establish careful, boundaried contact. "I do not expect forgiveness," she said during our first post-release meeting at a neutral coffee shop, "but I am getting help now, real help. The therapist says I have narcissistic tendencies and possibly borderline personality disorder. I never understood how much I was hurting people because I could only see my own needs." I nodded, neither accepting nor rejecting her tentative steps toward accountability. Actions will matter more than words moving forward, and they did. Over the next year, Melissa slowly demonstrated small but consistent changes. She made payments toward restitution, though the full amount would take decades to repay. She attended therapy regularly. She accepted the strict boundaries I established around our contact and financial discussions. My own journey of recovery involved learning to trust my instincts again. The experience had left me questioning my judgment, despite the fact that I had been right about Jason all along. With Sarah's encouragement, I started dating again, eventually meeting Caroline, a kindergarten teacher who had her own history of family complexity. She understood boundaries in a way that felt reassuring. "The thing about family," Caroline told me one evening as we discussed my history, "is that love and trust are different things. You can love someone without trusting them with your well-being." That distinction became my guiding principle. I could maintain contact with Melissa without giving her access to anything important. I could love my parents while being clear-eyed about their limitations. The most profound lesson was about the nature of responsibility itself. For years, I had carried the responsible one label as both a burden and a point of pride. But true responsibility includes protecting yourself, setting boundaries, and allowing others to experience the consequences of their actions. Sometimes the most responsible thing you can do is let someone fall. 5 years after the wedding loan disaster, my life had found a new equilibrium. Caroline and I were engaged. My career had advanced. My rebuilt emergency fund was even healthier than before. My relationship with my parents had evolved into something more honest, if sometimes uncomfortably direct. Melissa remained on the periphery of my life, still working to prove her trustworthiness one small action at a time. Jason, still in prison, occasionally sent manipulative letters that went unanswered. The experience had cost me financially, emotionally, and temporally. But it had also freed me from lifelong patterns that would have continued draining me indefinitely. Sometimes it takes a catastrophic rupture to create space for something healthier to grow. If you have ever been the responsible one in your family, you probably understand the unique burden that comes with that role. The expectations, the guilt, the endless giving without receiving. I hope my story helps you recognize when responsibility becomes exploitation and when love becomes manipulation. Setting boundaries is not selfishness. It is self-preservation. Have you ever had a family member take advantage of your kindness or responsibility? What did you do? How did you handle it? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might help someone else recognize the warning signs before they end up co-signing a fraudulent wedding loan. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more real-life experiences about navigating complex family dynamics. Share this video with someone who might need permission to set boundaries with loved ones who take advantage of their kindness. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that true family supports your growth, not just their needs.